Hi, this is Dinar. I am a PhD student at Instructional Design Development Evaluation Department at Syracuse University, and I have with me Lei.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lei Wang. So like Zina, I'm also the PhD student from the Instructional Design Development and Evaluation Department. So under the supervision of Dr. Tiffany Kozaka, Zina and I have been doing the project for almost 1 year. So now let's welcome Tiffany to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Tiffany Kazalka, a full professor in instructional design development and evaluation. My research interests lie in exploring the intersections among instruction, learning, and technology, with my practice specialties focused on instructional design and technology integration into learning.
Our topic of today's presentation is a rubric to assess learning resources using the principles of design and learning. Um, and we propose that this once the rubric is finalized and we seek your feedback and do a couple of reiterations, we will be able to add to the instructional designer's toolbox a rubric that helps them assess the learning resources using the principles of design and learning.
Okay, before we move forward, I'd like to talk about the key terms. So for this project, learning resources are vessels that contain content, instructions, activities, and feedback mechanisms to support learning. And we also use rubric for this project. So the rubric means an assessment tool that describes levels of performance on a particular task. So why we design a RIDLA? So RIDLA is the name of our rubric for instructional designers for assessment of learning resources. And we designed this rubric that is to assess the ability of learning resources to prompt deep learning.
So now situating it into the context, this word comes from our lab, which is called Riddler, Research in Designing Learning Resources. What we do there is basically we research about instructional design, development, and assessment, and solve the riddles that exist between interactive learning resources and how they prompt learning. So our integrative inquiry approach is informed by the three theories, and you will see these three theories coming forward as we talk about. They're generative learning, cognitive flexibility, and reflective thinking. And through these three theories, we are thinking to we conceptualized that this would lead to the learner engagement.
Yes, I can add one note. So if you want to know more about our projects, actually we have many ongoing projects. So you can simply Google RIDLA Syracuse University. So you can find, or you can click the link. So you can know more about our RIDLA project. So for this project, we're trying to validate a guideline for developing learning assessments aligned with different kinds of learning resources.
So now, why do we need this kind of rubric? It's because some educators currently use trial and error methods to design learning resources. So they try one thing, if it doesn't work, they try another thing and see if that learning resources is prompting the learning and meeting the needs of faculty and the student learning, right? But now we are moving from the current practice to a promising practice where we think that these three theories have contribution to student learning. So considering the importance of these three theories, cognitive flexibility, generative learning, and reflective thinking, to which we'll talk more about in the upcoming slides, we have designed a rubric that will help instructional designers, educators, and faculty members to see if the learning resources has the capacity, has the potential to prompt deep learning. And if it doesn't have, then adapt it to the criteria and traits to make the learning resources able to predict student learning. So as I already discussed with you, that we will be talking about three key theories, which is which are prompting deep learning. First is generative learning. So generative learning is basically making meaning of the content by developing associations between learners' prior knowledge and the current stimuli that is provided. So, and this has happened, like this comes into practice by cognitive and physical interaction with the learning resource and the learning material. Cognitive flexibility is another theory which brings in another different perspective, which says you can make meaning of the content by exploring the content in different contexts, formats, graphics. Formats means graphic, motions, text, sound, etc., and at different times for different purposes. So when you have you learn something from our context and apply it to the another context, and there is a similar situation, then the learning happens, the deep learning happens. The third theory is reflection, which is making meaning of the content by revisiting the prior knowledge. So you think about, what do I already know? And what do I have already experienced? And then put it into the lens of newly gained information. So whatever you're reading or whatever you are experiencing in the current learning experience, you connect it with the current experience. And then this is just to connect your prior knowledge with the current knowledge with the perspective of, again, fostering deep learning. So if you see the whole picture, deep learning is about connecting prior knowledge with the current knowledge. Current knowledge is stimulated by a stimuli, and the learner do it by interacting physically and cognitively with the stimuli that is presented. Stimuli could be in different contexts, application of something in different context, different provision of stimuli in different formats at different times and for different purposes. So now let's see how does it theoretically, that was a theoretical underpinning. Now let's see how it is in action. So for generative learning, the content, the meaning of the content is generated through physical manipulation. For example, creating a visual summary, creating a concept map, or creating a verbal summary, developing an analogy or taking notes, underlining on the PDF document or hard copy article, answering the reading prompts and the questions, and organizing the content in the headings and subheadings. So these are basically learners are engaging in generating something, a summary or a concept map, to engage with the content. Cognitive flexibility presents a different view. It says that you can present a couple of scenarios or cases or real life situation where learners would use one scenario or case or simulation to learn an aspect, and then use another to apply that learning to the other context. It could be in the same context and like similar context. The cases could be in similar context or completely different context. And this would trigger the transfer of learning in different contexts. Now coming to reflections. So basically in cognitive flexibility, you will provide different cases, and then you can ask them to do a meta-analysis kind of thing of, you applied this learning to different cases. What do you get an overarching sense from this? Now coming to reflection, in reflection, learners basically self-assess themselves. They provide feedback to their learners, to their peers, and they write reflective logs. They can set a new learning goal and think of how they're achieving that, and perhaps visualize some future steps on how can they improve better in learning in this particular content. So traits of learning resources. Now, what has learning resources have gotten themselves to prompt generative learning, cognitive flexibility, and reflection? And we identified 10 traits of learning resources from these theories. So learning resources, as they hold, they must prompt hands-on learning. Could be like, as we have already discussed, could be like making, underlining, writing summaries, creating visual concept maps, and then something on association of the current learning with the prior learning, and the task progression. How is learning resources prompting the learner to move ahead in the task? So the current task is A, how does the learning resources prompt the learner to learn, for example, different three-letter words. So what is the task progression? First, does it introduce three-letter word and then move ahead with another a couple of three-letter words so as to help learner learn three-letter words? What is the progression? How is it progressing? Is it going from simple to complex, or is it prompting them to do a complex one first and the simple one later, which would not work because the task progression should be from simple to complex. Um, Looking at the cognitive flexibility aspect, so as I already shared that cognitive flexibility is prompting learners to apply the learning in different contexts using the problem analysis and problem solving approaches. um, from the reflection perspective, so if the learning resource could prompt the learner to generate alternative explanations, suggest how can it be done differently in a different context. So this could be one of the prompt that learning resources is prompting learners to do. It could reinforce the concept by providing subtle feedback, certain feedback that feedback would help learners to reflect on what has gone well, what has gone wrong, and how can I improve. And again, can also trigger motivation by because as we discussed in the last slide, they are setting the learning goals. So learning goals would lead to self-directed learning and motivation. So moving from then on, if we see from the generative learning and cognitive flexibility, there is an interaction between the two, and both are suggesting that the learning resources should have some interactive component where learner physically and mentally manipulate with the content. Um, and the one thing that is common between all three, generative learning is basically saying physical and mental interaction, cognitive flexibility saying applying that same content in different situations, and reflection is saying generate alternative explanations, think about what would have been done differently if that was the case. So this all can be found in if we provide the learning resource provide learners to solve ill-structured problems in the context.
Okay, everyone. Now let's take 10 minutes to do this silent activity. So please click the link to access the rubric. Review this rubric and add your comments to this rubric. We are very interested to know your thoughts about the criteria and descriptions of the ratings and also the user-friendly of this rubric. So take 10 minutes to finish this task. We really appreciate your support. So as you review the rubric, you might think about some learning resources you have used, right? So probably you have some static PDF file, or think about the learning resources, like a very interactive learning resources, like simulation. So you can pick one or two learning resources to use them, use the rubric to assess the learning resources to see whether the rubric will prompt deep learning. Great, thank you so much. So after this, we are very pleased to know how your experience was, how you use this rubric to assess learning resources. Is this helpful? Do you believe it prompts deep learning? Anything missing? So we really want to get more feedback from you. Thank you.
Thank you. If you want to obtain a copy of final rubric, obviously we will incorporate your generous feedback that you have given it to us, and we'll do a couple of reiterations. If you want to obtain a final copy of a final rubric, which we would perhaps be developing post a couple of reiterations, so you can just write to us, and we will be able to share the rubric with you. Thank you so much for your participation.